Okay, Chapter 1, Exclusions and the Hypotheses. Imagine at time, space, and a definitive reluctance to recognize the obvious or obviously overlooked. A precursor to nothing or everything and shown in correlation beyond all our gifted reasoning. God organizes perfect destructive and procreative forces, guises, and patterns set forth and protected by these forces, which are these in many cases, inconquerable though at times, benign at others, manifesting violently, just adding justice to a somber, sobering truth. The universe, what is it, and what does it pertain to? The only answers lie in and of itself, containing oftentimes infinite patterns, illustrated with the most deafening poignancy beyond the all too often overlooked disclosures. Betrayed by a combustion I cannot discern, nor do I care to, imploding or exploding over billions of years, however not too random given their significant portions to be recorded. I'm only starting to write about such infinite patterns at this point in the book, in the pamphlet I should say. In this chapter, I would rather expand upon my rhythmic theory in terms easier to understand. Throw a rock into a lake that is calm and ripples develop. These too have a pattern, although only temporary. My intention in this chapter is to write of temporal issues, though as I believe the existence of physics as well as God is very obvious, it at times implements, in quotes, ideal physics, and at others delves both me and the reader into a theological state of mind. The other day as I returned home, as it was currently fall, with a blind eye I noticed the leaves on the trees that had partially turned brown but were still in part green. Who would mistake that for rhythm? In nature there are rhythmic patterns, as goes evolution, or should I say creationism, as not to confuse the reader or contradict, so it would seem, myself. For now, let's just assume whenever I say evolution, I mean creationism. I believe that God's approximate rhythmic patterns explained through my limited rationale should begin with this. Though perhaps it's a part of evolution, moment after moment and season upon season, year after year, there is a rhythm to our world, into our universe, and to our universe. This rhythm establishes a pattern over time. Whenever anything does not fall into this pattern, nature or the universe notices a break in the rhythm, and either destroys that which causes the break or adapts to or around it, assuming, of course, it does not make that which it did not destroy adapt. A good example of this would be cavefish, who currently do not have eyes because they do not need them. Now for more temporal issues, I would like at this point to discuss alpha rhythms, but do not currently have the information needed to further elaborate on my point. The adaptation of the universe and the earth is perhaps what makes nature and the universe strong. I know in one last statement I made them sound like a single issue, when it and the factor are two separate issues for the most part. I couldn't show my hypotheses without showing some exceptions to the rule. This being part of evolution. Not that I read about an evolution, but at least as I see it. Now, as I'm trying to make this viable, illuminated distribution of universal changeable energy as an exemplified instrument in approximate universal rhythms, I shall further be concerned with what falls outside of these approximate universal rhythms, which ultimately sometimes establish patterns, with all being part of the intrinsically rhythmic universe, which the pamphlet will be titled. In nature as well as the universe, there is an exception to every rule. This would not only be an example of this, but perhaps the rule exists because of this. I believe the one hypothesis can be taken all the way from the birth and death of stars into the temporal quantum, which I state because the birth and death of stars involves fission involves fission and fusion, or quantum physics. Illuminated distribution of universal changeable energy as an exemplified instrument in approximate universal rhythms. 1. The dying of light, such as through a black hole as gravity foils light, or it is foiled in some other manner, and rebirth of light within the same section of the universe, we believe has an approximate rhythm, which would prove as everything is in a constant state of flux. Plato. There are no absolutes except God, but approximate rhythms throughout the universe, delving into and controlling nature completely as God's rhythmic system. I'm using the time which it takes for light to be disposed of and reborn as a basis to prove that the entire universe uses systems that are correlated through rhythmic pattern. When I say light, I mean stars, by the way. 2. Based upon the same given evidence, if the first hypothesis can be proven a theory, then so can this. God created the universe to exist in sections. To be proven, an astronomy observatory which records the death and birth of stars would have to send their findings of at least the past 20 years, I would think, to a mathematician who would then have to do a series of equations with variations. Currently, these are just hypotheses. Chapter 2. Exceptions inside of a truth. Now then, for you of lesser and greater understanding in theory, whether or not precluded by a mishap or by the natural order of things in our ever-growing universe, the many always, as in all things, outweigh the one. In simpler terms, if a star or series of stars fall outside of this approximate rhythmic pattern, it does not make it any more, or it does not make it more or any less true, as the universe is truly unpredictable even to the greatest of minds. Let's explain with wooden matches. Match A burns throughout to the point of the person holding it having to drop it, while match B burns only just throughout the wick. Match C on a windy day, not of an ideal control test group, goes out just past the halfway point of the match on its own, so it would seem. Neither is the universe a fixed or control group, but one ever-changing, but a series of variables, which I am going to prove, as in almost all things, has an approximate rhythmic pattern. As I've already illustrated, there are some exceptions to the rule when just dealing with temporal issues, provided then I would assume that they also exist in the cosmos or space. Is it properly said? Okay. Or space, or in space. We need to secure every area of such a hypothesis or hypotheses for a theory to be well-founded. I would be all the more elated without any preclusions, I must admit, however. In the simplest of terms, match C is unpredictable on such a windy day in regards to its fire, and likewise, furthermore, if we brought match A out into the wind and were able to relight it, it too then might burn out. And how many stars go supernova in clusters, destroying, if not swallowing up those around them? Chapter 3. The procreations of stars, and things that we do not understand. Inside of every process, every system that has a process, there is a product, mathematically, of time. Prevalent in and precarious to my writing herein. Is a star born every 5 seconds, every 15 seconds, and likewise further dying? It is impossible to know, so let's stay within my hypotheses. Even then, given a possible preclusion, it would be very hard to prove. Such writing is already listed herein. Even in a fixed or given section of the universe, it seems to me that although not too often stars can and must fall outside of an approximate rhythmic pattern, we shall refer to these abnormal stars, which are so due to time, as anomalies without respect to the planets, which an explanation is usually why it's described within astrophysics. This deviation of time by a very few could throw my entire hypotheses into chaos, if not forewarned both to and by the reader. But as I already stated in the previous chapter, the many in our ever-growing universe always outweigh the one. However, the hypotheses still stand, and make notice that I have emphasized such preclusions as to take the proper measures to make the reader and everyone involved in proving this understand. How do we know when it is day, and how likewise do we know when it is night? As the earth rotates on its axis, daylight can be seen, and then later, as it completes its revolution, night. This, although easy to understand and thereby far the principle of the chapter title, is more proof of approximate rhythmic patterns. Although slightly overstated, because the earth keeps a tight rhythmic pattern in time, it should do the trick to further elaborate on my point.